All right, let's jump right in. We hear a ton about corporate climate action, right? But one of the most important and, kind of technical concepts for actually holding companies accountable is something called Scope 2 emissions. And trust me, getting a handle on this is the key to seeing who's really making a difference.
So let me ask you this. Think about when you're at work, right? You plug in your laptop, the lights are on, maybe the AC is blasting. Your company is using a ton of power. But who's actually on the hook for the emissions from generating all that electricity? Where does that show up on the carbon balance sheet?
So, here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll nail down what Scope 2 emissions actually are. Then, we'll get into the big challenge. How in the world do you measure them? We'll look at the two main ways, location-based versus market-based. And finally, we'll see why it's not about picking one, but why you really need both.
Okay, Section 1. Let's start with the absolute basics. What are Scope 2 emissions?
So Scope 2 emissions are basically all about the energy a company buys. We're not talking about the smoke coming out of a factory smokestack or the exhaust from a delivery truck the company owns. That stuff is Scope 1. They are direct emissions. Scope 2 is one step removed. It's the carbon footprint of the power they use but don't generate themselves.
Here's a super simple way to think about it. The power plant that's burning coal or gas, that's their Scope 1 emission. But your company, the one that's using all that power, that's your Scope 2 emission. See how that works? One creates the supply, the other creates the demand.
All right, so we get what they are. But this is where things get a little tricky.
I mean, how do you actually measure emissions that are happening somewhere else, right? It's not like you can just check a fuel gauge on a machine in your building. These emissions are happening at a power plant maybe hundreds of miles away, and the electricity is all mixed together on the grid. So how do you accurately pin a piece of that on one specific company?
Well, to solve this puzzle, two totally different accounting methods popped up. The first one, location-based, looks at the physical reality of the power grid right where you are. The second, market-based, is all about the financial choices and contracts a company makes. Let's break them both down.
First up, let's tackle the location-based method. This one's a bit more straightforward.
The whole idea here is pretty simple, actually. You are responsible for the average carbon footprint of the electrical grid you are literally plugged into. It doesn't matter who you buy your power from or if you have some special green contract. All that matters is the physical mix of energy, the coal, the gas, the solar, the wind, in your specific geographic area.
So the big advantage here is that it gives you a uniform benchmark. You can compare two companies in the same city, apples to apples. Super useful. But the drawback? It gives a company zero credit for actively trying to buy cleaner energy than what the local grid is serving up.
So, for example, let's say your office is in a region that's really heavy on coal power. Your location-based emissions are going to be high, period. But if you could magically pick up that exact same office and drop it in a region powered mostly by solar, boom, your emissions number plummets, not because you did anything different, but just because of your zip code.
But wait a minute, what about a company's choices? Shouldn't that count for something? Well, that's exactly where the other approach comes in, the market-based method.
This method is all about reflecting a company's active purchasing decisions. It's about intention. It's designed to track and reward companies for putting their money where their mouth is and going out of their way to buy renewable energy.
And this is where the power of the market really kicks in. Because this method measures emissions based on specific energy contracts, it creates a huge financial incentive to buy green. It allows companies to claim lower or even zero emissions, which in turn helps fund more wind farms and solar projects.
So how do they prove they bought clean energy? Through these things, contractual instruments. In the US, they're called Renewable Energy Certificates, or RECs for short. Over in Europe, they're known as Guarantees of Origin. Basically, a company buys these certificates, and each one represents a specific amount of clean energy that was generated. They use these to match their own electricity use and, on paper, lower their emissions.
Okay, so now we've got two very different ways of looking at the exact same thing, a company's electricity use. So which one is right?
And that's the big question, isn't it? It really feels like they're competing. One is about the physical grid, the other is about market choices. You'd think you have to pick one, but the real answer is a little more interesting than that.
The truth is they're not really competitors. They're more like partners. They each tell a different but equally important part of the story. The location-based number shows the hard reality of the grid a company relies on every day. And the market-based number, that shows what the company is actively doing to try and change that reality by investing in renewables.
And hey, this isn't just a nice idea. The biggest, most important standard for this stuff, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, actually requires companies to report both. They know you need both sides of the coin to get the full picture.
And that really is the bottom line here. As the quote says, this dual approach provides a comprehensive view. You get to see the company's impact based on where they are right now, and you get to see their commitment to driving the future energy transition.
And ultimately, what this dual system does is create real transparency. It empowers everyone, investors, customers, you name it, to see the whole story. And that pressure encourages companies to not only buy clean energy certificates, but to also push for cleaning up the actual physical grids they operate on.
Which means the next time you see a company claiming it runs on 100% renewable energy, you'll know there's a deeper question to ask. Thanks to this whole dual reporting system for Scope 2, we can finally see not just the story a company wants to tell, but the full, complicated, and frankly, much more interesting story of what's really going on.